Hello, it's great to see you again. We hope you're enjoying the course. The subject of this session is good sex. There's a lot to be said on this very important subject, and our aim is to open up communication between you as a couple in an area that is difficult for people to talk about.
First, a story. In Jenny and Ralph's home, as well as a full-time job, Jenny did most of the housework. But one evening, Jenny arrived home from the office to find the children had had their bath, there was a load in the washing machine and another in the dryer. Dinner was cooking and the table set. Jenny was astonished. Well, it turned out that Ralph had read an article that said wives who work full-time and had to do their own housework were usually too tired to have sex. The night went well, and the next day she told her friends at the office all about it. "We had a great dinner," she said. "Ralph even helped the children with their homework, folded all the washing and put it away. I really enjoyed the evening." "But what about afterwards?" asked her friends. "Oh, that. Ralph was much too tired."
We asked people on the streets to give us their views on the importance of sex in marriage.
In a lifelong marriage, sex, the actual act of sex I don't think is as important as intimacy.
I think it's very important. And if you didn't have sex anymore, come on.
Everybody loves sex. It's all about the sex when it comes to, a long relationship. It's really important.
Still important.
I think you maybe don't have to have it, but it sure is fun.
Please each other, meet our needs, meet my needs. Ain't no complaint,
Sex is pretty important in a relationship. There's an intimacy between two people that no one else is sharing. It's only you and that other person.
You need to have emotional bonding as well as physical bonding between two people.
It's a sort of bond. If you're unable to satisfy your partner well enough, it starts bringing problems.
I've tried to dumb down the importance of sex in my relationship as much as I can, but it's still looming there in the background. So inevitably it's important.
Yeah, it's very important. That physical side has to be addressed.
I think it's important.
Yeah, it is, but not like it was in the very beginning.
No, it's different.
It
changes.
Very, especially once you've had the babies, it changes again.
If there is no physical side, then you are just very good friends.
To me, with my experience, I wouldn't say sex. I think it depends on the individual. For instance, fine, once a while, you have it, but then I prefer communication.
Well, I don't think it's the most important. I think, when you're early on in the relationship, it's kind of more lust and that kind of thing, but as you go on, it's actually companionship. And
is that what it is?
Yeah. It's other kind of things that's actually more important,
C'est un des sources de la vie, no? Is the point of being, no? To reproduction and the pleasure.
We believe the sexual relationship is a vitally important part of a strong and healthy marriage. It affects every other part of our relationship, and every other part of our relationship affects our sex life.
Western culture undermines that idea. We're bombarded with sex everywhere, in magazines, in films, and on TV, but it's almost always separated from a long-term relationship. Most films suggest that good sex is about instant gratification. A beautiful woman and a gorgeous man get into bed together and the sex is instantaneously wonderful. But how many films have you seen about sexual passion in a marriage of 20 years or more?
The impression we're fed is that good sex can only be found in a new relationship or in an affair. While in a long-term relationship, the passion will fizzle out over time. But that's just not true.
Well, after 30 years, the culture would say that's boring, right? And Hollywood sells that. But there's nothing like making the commitment to one another that we're just going to keep working at this. And this is sweet. I know you like nobody else knows you. I know what you enjoy. I know how you're feeling. I know. It's just not the same thing.
Yeah.
That's the experience of hundreds of thousands of married couples. And for that matter, our own experience is that sex can improve over time. Sex is designed to be in the context of a committed, long-term relationship where it can grow and deepen in pleasure and significance as our marriage matures.
Sex is a way of communicating love that goes beyond words. It's the ultimate body language. Not only does sex express the one flesh bond, but every time a couple makes love tenderly and passionately, the bond is strengthened. Sex joins us together not only physically, but also emotionally, psychologically, and even spiritually.
But many couples give up when the initial infatuation dies down, or because of tiredness, or they just let complacency set in. And that's so sad. A couple who we know, who are both doctors, who run the marriage course in another part of the UK, told us one reason why sex is such a powerful bonder. They told us the pituitary gland produces 8 different hormones, and one of those hormones is oxytocin, which is produced during breastfeeding and increases the bonding between mother and baby. Oxytocin can also be released during orgasm in men and women, and so making love helps to strengthen the bond between us.
Without sex, a husband and wife can become like 2 flatmates, but we're called to be lovers. Now, in case you've been given the wrong impression, let me assure you, God loves sex. He invented it. And if you're in any doubt about that, we suggest you read a highly erotic love poem in the middle of the Bible that's called the Song of Songs. That's a celebration of the sexual relationship between a man and his new bride.
Sex isn't just the icing on the cake of a marriage. It's a vital ingredient of the cake itself.
I think sex binds us together. And actually I find in some relationships where the sexual relationship has died, bit by bit the rest of the relationship often dies. I think people often feel rejected. They feel, one woman said, he doesn't want to touch me anymore. I feel less than nothing. And so I'm a very strong believer that although, as I say, it will vary between relationships, sex in a marriage is absolutely vital.
In this session, we're going to look at how to maintain our sexual relationship over the whole course of a marriage, and also how to reignite sexual desire when it dies down or dies out. To do this, we need to be deliberate, to work at it as with any other area of our marriage.
The ambiance, the romantic part of it, all of that. As they say, the mind is the most important sexual organ. When you're feeling loving and caring and wanting to do is to share with the other, it's the ultimate gift that you can give to the other. And if you put it in that term, it's not about yourself.
It's interesting how much the discussion about sex within the marriage has a lot to do with nothing in the bedroom. It has to do with how you were during the day with each other. Was there a nice time over dinner, or just a nice walk holding hands? Just something sweet that makes you feel really close. I think for women it's different. We want to feel warm and snuggly before we ever get close to the bedroom, and it's not about what you're wearing or not wearing. It has to do with what sweet thing was done that day. I mean, a guy in the kitchen doing dishes can be really sexy, you know. It means that, wow, he's taken the time and effort to do something that I would have to do. So sex has a lot to do with nothing about sex, and it really creates the mood for later on in the day.
Our culture today so often gets it wrong, that if sexual desire has faded, that's it. But we strongly believe that it can be and must be reawakened. We can't just leave it to our feelings.
Most couples struggle with their sex life at one time or another for a variety of reasons. It may be that we're not feeling as physically attracted to our husband or wife as we once did.
Or it may be that we feel a failure or vulnerable or threatened in this whole area. And we may not be able to identify why we're finding sex hard or why we shy away from physical intimacy. Our sexual desires and responses are very complex.
Difficulties may be the result of our upbringing. We may have lacked physical affection as a child, or we may have received misleading messages from our parents or at school or from the church. Perhaps sex was a no-go area that was never discussed. Or we may experience difficulties if sex has been wrongly used either by us or towards us. Past sexual relationships can cast a shadow over our marriage.
We want to pay tribute to those of you for whom sex has not been easy. Perhaps it's been painful or impossible through an accident or illness or your past, or maybe through problems in conceiving. But you've continued to grow closer despite disappointments and difficulties. And you've kept talking about it, refusing to allow it to become a no-go area. And you're committed to expressing your love for each other in other physical ways.
Our experience from talking to many couples is that the majority of difficulties are resolved through a better understanding of each other and through making some changes to our behaviour or lifestyle.
However, some couples need more help, perhaps where abuse or other issues from the past have caused a fear of physical intimacy. But these too can be resolved through talking to someone about it. And please ask your course leader if you need help, and they can refer you to a professional.
If you are struggling, seek to move forwards together. Don't regard this as your issue or my issue, but our issue. You don't need to remain stuck where you are.
So yeah, we didn't have any problems having our first child. There he was, we were pregnant and happy and there was no problems. And then we decided we wanted to have baby number 2 and it just took a really long time. We had 3 miscarriages in about 2 years, so it was really, really sad and hard time for us.
Yeah, I mean, it put a strain too. You talk to your friends and it's like, oh, you've been trying to have a baby for 2 years now, you must be having sex all the time and it's great. And yeah, we're having sex all the time, but it's not necessarily great. It's like programmed and it's stressful because it was, you're so hopeful that, that you're going to have the child, and it's I don't know, it just kind of manifests itself in that, sex just isn't fun. It's routine, and so that was really hard just between us, like our personal relationship.
We now want to look at 6 elements, all of which are part of the dynamic process of developing our sexual relationship. We'll have a short break after points 1 and 4 to allow you to talk to each other. Before I let Scylla begin, I should tell you, she's probably the most uninhibited person I've ever met. Well, that's a great advantage for talking publicly about sex. It's also somewhat dangerous, as I'm never sure what she might suddenly decide to reveal about us.
Don't worry, I shall try not to get carried away. The first element that we want to look at is about the importance of communication. Sex isn't always as straightforward as it sometimes seems in the movies.
I came across a wonderful story a couple of years ago. Sarah and Neil had been married for 8 years or so, and they had a little girl, Samantha. I think she was about 3 years old, and Samantha's bedroom was being redecorated. So for a week or so, she slept in a little put-you-up bed at the bottom of her parents' bed. And she went to bed about 7 o'clock at night, and they had a pizza together and lit the candles and watched Sleepless in Seattle. And it's a romantic film, isn't it? And when he got to bed, he must have been feeling quite amorous, because they get into the bedroom and it's pitch dark. He slides in his side of the bed and his wife slides in the other side, and he said, "Darling, come a little nearer. Don't even think about it." She said, "No." "Oh, please, darling." "No. Samantha's in the room." And they have this conversation in stage whispers. "Oh, darling, please." "No. Look," she said, "this is not Sleepless in Seattle. This is not the Empire State Building. I'm not Meg Ryan, and you are definitely not Tom Hanks. No. Please. No." And then suddenly another voice joins the conversation. "Daddy, when Mummy says no, she means no."
In real life, sex isn't always perfect. We'll all go through some difficult times. In order for our sexual relationship to grow and to develop, we need to learn to communicate honestly with each other.
Talking about our sex life can be difficult because it's a deeply private area of our lives, and it requires us to be vulnerable with each other. And we want to reassure you about this session. If you make a start, even a small one, saying what you feel able to say, it can be the beginning of a process that will gradually get easier.
If you want a good sex life, you want to be a better person to guarantee that that was going to happen, especially if you do have a spouse that is very sensitive and stuff like that. You don't want to offend them, and all of a sudden everything goes out the window. So being able to talk about that during the marriage course was really very good. And I think every couple needed to hear that, and they needed to understand that it's a fundamental, and they did address it in a very, very clean, clear, and advantageous way for you to understand.
Communication enables us to understand each other better and increases our intimacy. The way we respond sexually as men and women is different. And at the risk of generalizing, the differences might typically be men focus on sex, women focus on affection. Men tend to think about the destination, women tend to think about the journey. Men are rather like a gas stove. They heat up instantly and cool down rapidly, whereas women are more like an electric stove. They take time to heat up and take longer to cool down.
That may sound like men and women are completely incompatible, but those very differences can actually enhance our lovemaking. Also, if you think about it, if women were like men, it could all be over in about 30 seconds flat, which would be very boring. But the differences in the way that we're wired can lead to a lot of misunderstanding. More than likely, we've come into marriage with different expectations towards sex, some conscious and some subconscious, and that's why communication is crucial. I think both men and women find it hard to ask each other, what would you like me to do for you? And it may be through shyness or pride, or we just feel we should already know.
Actually, we need to discover how to arouse each other. We need to ask, what times, where, and how do you most enjoy making love? What causes you to back off or shut down?
The way the marriage course helped us in regards to our sex life was giving us tools to talk about like the sex itself before we maybe had conversations about the amount we would do it, or how kids might change how we'll have sex, or those kinds of things. I think the marriage course sort of put front and center, what are your sexual desires? What do you sexually enjoy? And those maybe weren't necessarily conversations we had previously. And so I think the marriage course really helped us in putting our own sexual needs front and center and discussing how that might play out in our marriage.
For most women, it's important to have enough privacy and to feel secure when making love. And that's a good reason to have a lock on your bedroom door, especially if you have children.
If you do have young children, or if you're facing infertility, good communication will be particularly important. Otherwise, it can be the start of a slippery slope, which can be difficult to climb back up.
And I can certainly identify with that after having had 4 children. I remember very clearly Nikki and I going away for 3 days on our own, in between our 3rd and 4th child being born. And I was so looking forward to it. And I was really hoping that it would rekindle the excitement that had largely gone out of our sex life for me. However, after the 2nd day, I remember feeling in despair and wondering whether my body would ever be capable of responding in a sexually passionate way again. And I spent half of one night in tears. And, you know, it was only through talking and talking with Nikki that I felt he understood. And that made such a difference. And I think it wasn't actually until our youngest child was 2 years old that my body went back to responding normally again. And that was 4 years later. And it felt like a long time.
If we fail to make space and time to talk about our feelings, it so easily leads to misunderstandings and feelings of isolation and separation. Communication is essential if we're to work through problems. Problems don't mean the end of our sex life. For this session, we interviewed Maggie Ellis, who's a psychosexual therapist, and we're going to hear from her now.
Often people will encounter a sexual problem in their marriage, but do the ostrich approach, bury their head in the sand, hope it'll go away. I think often because we're embarrassed, maybe we don't know who to go and ask help from. Also, because it touches very deeply our personal identity and self-confidence, and often we just hope it will go away if we do nothing about it. The sad thing is it usually gets worse. So much better to talk straight away, get the help that is needed. Start by just talking within the marriage. But if you can't resolve it together, go and talk to your GP and get a referral to a specialist, a psychosexual therapist or whoever's available locally. Because if we get the help quickly, then usually everything can be nipped in the bud and doesn't have to be a big deal. It's when we leave things and ignore them that they become entrenched, both psychologically and maybe physically, and then can be much more difficult to treat. Also, sometimes sexual problems are actually caused by a physical problem. Maybe nothing at all to do with psychology, but it may be a byproduct of some medication that's being taken, or could be due to something like diabetes or all sorts of different physical disorders that could be causing a sexual problem. And actually just to isolate what the physical cause is, maybe change some medication or get some appropriate treatment, could be all that's needed to simply resolve the problem.
According to medical statistics, 40% of women and over 30% of men will at some time in their life experience a sexual problem. For men, two of the most common physical problems are erectile dysfunction and premature ejaculation, and both can usually be sorted out.
For women, the problem could be a loss of desire, perhaps through tiredness, or it could be physical pain during intercourse, or a failure to achieve orgasm. For women, arousal is more complex. Medical statistics show that 99% of women are physically able to achieve orgasm, and yet there are many women who don't or rarely do so. Again, there are different reasons for that, but for a woman to be understood emotionally will tend to be a crucial part of experiencing fulfillment.
For both men and women, negative emotions such as fear, guilt and anxiety are often barriers to sexual enjoyment.
It takes courage and trust to bring our fears out into the open and talk about them with each other. But that is the way to move forwards together. We want you to hear now from our feature couple, Richard and Catherine, who've been married for 24 years.
We did the marriage course about 10 years ago. We thought we had a pretty good marriage at the time, but we hoped, I think, that we'd find out ways to have a great marriage.
I think we thought that our marriage was great, but could get better. And we did know that there were certain areas, and particularly the area of sex, we didn't really have the tools, we didn't know how to move forward. Coming on the marriage course was a great opportunity to look at those areas in particular.
Oh, it's an open goal! Session 1 is the foundational part, and on that we fill in a questionnaire taking stock. That gave you the opportunity to be honest and write down one or two points that you hoped you might be able to talk about later on in the course. I thought, well, I'll try and be honest and I'll assess where I think we are, and so I put down my answers, and when I shared them with Catherine, it didn't seem to go down as well as I'd been hoping.
Yes, I felt really upset when I read what Richard had put, because it shattered my illusions of the rosy relationship that I thought we had, and particularly on the area of sex and physical intimacy. In a way, it wasn't a very good start, but we found as the course went on that we could talk about these things. There was a safe place to do it, and we learnt the tools to be able to communicate and to deal with issues in a really constructive way. For me, session 6 was like a light coming on in many ways. I remember Scylla in the talks talking about the importance of our family background and the bearing that that has on how we view sex within marriage. I grew up in a home where there wasn't a lot of touch, where if there was anything suggestive on the television, my father would get a newspaper and rustle it loudly. And maybe for the first time I understood how my family background had impacted what was going on for us.
And I was able to explain to Catherine about the importance of that physical relationship of touch for me, not just sex, but the whole idea of having a close physical relationship with each other. And I was able to tell Catherine about times when perhaps we'd been together and met people, and she would be embarrassed by the fact that we were physically, maybe holding hands or walking closely, and she'd separate herself from me, and the hurt that went with those sort of things.
And that was great for me to hear that and understand that, because I had no idea that that was what Richard was feeling. So just understanding his expectations and where he was coming from in that direction was really helpful for me. When I was about 9, we were on holiday in France, and a man locked me in a room with the intention of assaulting me. He didn't actually manage to do it, and I managed to get free, but I was really frightened at the time. And it was never really talked about, and I'd locked it away. It was only when we started talking about these issues, when we were doing the course, that I realised that I had a fear that related back to that incident.
And I was amazed about what had happened to Catherine and the effect that it was having upon her. But it had also helped me understand how important it was for my responses to her, how important things like tenderness and gentleness were to her, and how important my role was going to be in helping sort through the issues that had been so deeply buried for so many years.
We went and got some help, we were able to talk about it, and that was the best thing that we could ever have done for our marriage.
It's made a tremendous difference to our marriage. Both of us now can communicate about what we're feeling at that physical level.
It's about both of us giving and understanding each other and understanding each other's expectations. And I think we also know it's not Hollywood, but it has a potential, if we work at it, to go on getting better and better throughout a lifetime.
For some people, a helpful catalyst for starting to talk about sex, particularly about any problems you might be facing, is to get a good book about building a good sex life. We list some on our website, and it may help to read the relevant section and then discuss it together.
We'd like you to take a few minutes now to ask your partner what's most relevant for them so far in this session. You might want to begin by discussing how easy or difficult it is for you to talk about your sexual relationship and what's affected that.
We hope that helped to start a conversation that you'll continue and that you'll find it gets easier.
The second element in building a good sexual relationship is the importance of tenderness. For this element, we're going to be speaking particularly to the men. The first thing that we as men must learn about sex is that it's about giving. Scylla said earlier that if women were like men, it could all be over in 30 seconds. She exaggerates. I heard a speaker called Tom Nelson say this: physically, it can take a man 7 seconds to have sex. A man can be ready anytime, any place. But a man cannot be a good lover unless he's helped with the washing up, filled the car up with fuel, taken out the rubbish, and been sensitive towards his wife's needs. Tenderness means not only showing support in practical ways, but also taking time to tune in to our wife's emotional needs.
This diagram sums up the differences between men and women when it comes to sex. The top half is the man. You can see the on-off switch is very clear and very simple. The bottom half is the woman, where it's slightly more complicated. And as one man on the marriage course said to us, what's more, the wiring gets changed about every 2 weeks.
In our culture, sex has become very self-orientated, so that the question most often asked is, how can I satisfy my desires? How can I obtain maximum pleasure? But good sex isn't about mechanics and technique, how often or how many orgasms can one of us achieve. Sex is about giving ourselves to each other. And as men, we have to learn and relearn to give emotionally first. And that takes time. For a woman to give herself, conflict must first be resolved. She must feel safe. She must feel loved and special.
The opposite of tenderness is violence. A UK government website reports that 1 in 4 women suffers some form of domestic violence. Most terrible of all is that some of that takes place in the bedroom. The bedroom is where we make ourselves ultimately vulnerable, where we're most intimate with each other.
The bedroom should be the place where a woman knows that here she is safe and loved, where she'll be treated tenderly, where she'll be cherished by a man who knows her like no other.
Tenderness also means being tender with our words. There's a very strong link between building each other's self-esteem and building an intimate sexual relationship.
We need to make it a rule never to criticise our husband or wife's natural shape, nor to compare their body to the current fashions. Did you know that only 1% of women are physically able to have a figure like the supermodels in the adverts? And frankly, we'd all look a bit better with a bit of airbrushing. We mustn't stop telling each other what we love about the other's body. Our tender words will build confidence in our partner.
At the same time, we need to take care of our own bodies for each other's sake. Most people, when they're engaged, take great effort to keep fit and healthy and look good. And then sadly, once married, some people stop making an effort and let themselves go. And that's not fair on each other.
Our partner must be able to let us know if our breath or our body isn't smelling nice. It's all too easy to become passive in marriage, but our goal is to continue to be attractive for our husband or wife.
When we go out on a date, I love it when Jeff puts on a little fragrance, because he doesn't typically do that, and I just really enjoy that a lot.
It's just my own personal choice. You know, I'm in business, and I don't typically wear a cologne or aftershave or anything. It's just my style. So I usually forget when we're going to go out on a date or something, but occasionally I will remember, and she always is affirming with that, so that's a good thing. The other thing that I would do, maybe subconsciously, maybe intentionally, but she usually gets dressed first, and I will usually try to pick something that I'm going to wear when we're going on a date that's complementary, not really matching, not like a uniform, but kind of looks kind of cool together, and she is usually affirming and recognizes that, and so that's kind of a fun thing that we do.
People always tease us, do you guys dress alike on purpose? So I didn't think that the answer was yes, but I just learned something new.
Finally, tenderness involves being tender with touch. We may need to increase non-sexual touching, being affectionate, holding hands, putting an arm around the shoulder, or a hug, or brushing each other as we pass.
I think for Jen and I, like what we were able to process and bring up was that for me, it doesn't always have to be about having the sexual experience. Sometimes it is just the physical touch of her just, you know, touching my back or rubbing the back of my hair or something like that, and just letting me know that she's thinking about me, she cares about me, and just that touch sometimes can mean everything. And it doesn't have to lead into having sex. It just makes me feel a little bit more like, hey, I'm her guy, you know, she loves me, and she just wants to show me really quick that she's thinking about me, and then she loves me in that way.
And it also allowed us to process, it's the non-sexual touches that turn me on more than the sexual touches. If you want to get me warm, I like the non-sexual first, so.
If a man only touches his wife when he wants sex, he sends a terrible signal. His wife will feel used rather than loved. And it can lead to no physical contact at all, as the wife backs off in case it's interpreted by her husband as an encouragement for sex.
Let's now look at the third element, the importance of responsiveness. We all need to recognise what a powerful gift we have to give to each other through our sexual relationship. I think particularly we as women need to understand and be confident in the positive nature of our own sexuality and what our responsiveness sexually can mean for our partner.
A couple called Jeff and Shaunti Feldon did extensive research about the differences between men and women in terms of their approach to sex in marriage. The results of their survey of 1,000 people found that 75% of the husbands interviewed and 25% of the wives wanted more and better sex. by which they meant wanting their partner to be more responsive and to show their desire for them.
Many of us don't realise the emotional consequences of our response, or lack of it. A wife may all too easily interpret her husband's desire for sex as either a purely physical desire or an insensitive demand.
One husband in the Felden survey spoke for many men when he said, "When she says no, I feel that I'm rejected. No is not no to sex as she might feel. It is no to me as I am. And I'm vulnerable as I ask or initiate. It's plain and simple rejection."
When we as wives show our desire for our husband, we're communicating our love for him in a very powerful way. Being responsive may mean taking the initiative to make love as a deliberate choice, even though we may not be in the mood. For most women, and for a significant number of men, sex starts as a decision and then arousal follows.
Sometimes we choose to say yes to making love because we value our sex lives and know all the wonderful things it brings, even if in the moment, actually, you'd rather go to sleep or do something else. Having made that choice, we need to continue to make choices to be fully present in the act of lovemaking. As we do so, then desire and arousal can follow. And it can turn into something that's very pleasurable, even if at the beginning we didn't expect it to be. So it's more than valid to make love out of choice, to make choices in the lovemaking. And I would want to emphasise it's important not just to say yes, but to choose to be fully present in it. Because we can say yes but be dissociated from the experience mentally and in our bodies. And that's not what yes means. Yes means that I'm choosing to be in touch with my body and to be in touch with my love and my mind and my emotions, and to give all of that to my partner, because that's what we mean by making love.
Our responsiveness can give our partner an amazing sense of confidence and well-being about life. However, responsiveness requires a climate of trust between us. Trust is the foundation of a good sexual relationship. Sexual pleasure requires the ability to feel free to give ourselves completely to our partner, to let go emotionally and physically.
This is challenging for many people, and trust is an essential foundation for that freedom to let go. Sometimes we may need to go right back to basics, rediscovering the enjoyment of touching and being touched, and through that, building trust.
It was a really deep-rooted hurt. It all came from the conflict of us just not knowing how to connect with one another intimately.
I also didn't know who I was. I felt like intimately, so I was really hurt by that.
So your identity was
kind of
just
crushed. I felt very insecure then. I didn't know what to do, and so that was a wound that was big for a while, and it was a big wound for Aaron. We both wanted it to work, but we never wanted to ask each other for it. So that was a big hurt for a while, that we were both injured.
Intimacy especially is about, it's a long-term commitment. It's something that you're just not gonna, it's just not gonna happen. It's two people that are flawed in many ways, two people that come from completely different families and backgrounds, and not only in intimacy, because I think a lot of things have to click in order for that to click.
As we saw in our session on forgiveness, hurt undermines trust and must be healed, not least for the sake of our sexual relationship.
American author Michelle Viner Davis, in her book The Sex-Starved Marriage, says this: "In my years as a marriage therapist, I can tell you with confidence that holding grudges is one of the most effective methods for killing desire that I've ever seen. Sometimes letting go of the past feels like an impossible feat, especially when the hurt is enormous.
But it can be done through choosing to forgive. Nikki and I have seen that happen for couples again and again, even when there's been unfaithfulness. Forgiveness is necessary for the rebuilding of trust, which enables us to be responsive to our partner again.
The fourth element is the importance of romance. Romance creates the setting for good sex. Romance has the potential to draw us into a world that belongs only to the two of us, a world in which our imagination is awakened and our senses are stimulated.
Romance is the bridge between the everyday world of practicality and the private place of our sexual relationship. Romance is the antidote to sex becoming mechanical and routine.
Creating romance for one another needn't be complicated or expensive. It just involves doing something out of the ordinary.
I'm a romantic. I love beauty. I love color. I love standing on a beach watching a sunset. All those kinds of things are an important part of my makeup.
I think romance, again, is sort of defined individually. I mean, some women love to get flowers. I think flowers are beautiful, but then I have to take care of them. I have to change the water. I'm going to see them die. And so it's like, but I love the thought of, you know, doing something sweet like that. I think you don't have to be, again, all dressed up in something frilly or whatever. I think it can be really romantic to snuggle with your sweats on and just something you share, and that's really romantic. So I think, again, it needs to be defined individually.
Because romance is so important for many women, it's good when husbands take the initiative, even if it may not feel very natural to them.
Dolores would like to have the romance, and for me, I'm not naturally inclined to think of really romantic things to do. So then maybe I push it away because I'm not really creative or whatever. That's one thing I have to work on. I know that, and the course did its best, but it's working with me. So
We're now going to pause for a few moments to give you an opportunity to tell each other what have been the most romantic moments for you in your relationship.
The fifth element is the importance of anticipation. Our most important sexual asset is our mind. Because anticipation builds desire, it's good to develop our own private language and signals which indicate that we'd like to make love.
We need to guard what we think about for the sake of our marriage. And because most men are easily stimulated visually, we particularly need to be careful about being aroused through looking at other people.
I think for some marriages, pornography is a terrible problem. And normally it would be the wife that discovers her husband has been using pornography. And women say to me, Robert, I had so many emotions all in one go. I felt betrayed. I felt, aren't I enough for him? I felt with regard to our sex life, how can it ever be as good as that? She looks fantastic, she looks sexy, she's dressed up in all that stuff. There's no commitment, there's no kids to get to school, there's no carpets to clean, there's no housework. And you know, Rob, that quickly turned to resentment. Because I felt it was so unfair of him. That he was living in this world that didn't include me, in which everything was perfect and everything was wonderful and made me feel less than nothing. And actually, to many men, a bit of porn is neither here nor there, but to many women, this is a devastating blow that they will find it very hard to recover from. So I think it's something we ought to look at pretty seriously. I feel pretty strongly about it because I know it can destroy marriages.
We can't help being aroused, whether it's by what we see in films, on adverts, magazine covers, and so on. But we can decide to direct our erotic thoughts and desires towards our husband or wife. If you're a man who's struggling with pornography, you're not alone. And you'll know how hard it is to break free. If you pray, we suggest you ask for God's forgiveness and help, however many times you've done that before. And then, It can also be a great help to find another man who understands the serious damage that pornography can do. Tell him of your desire to break free and ask if you can be accountable to him.
If you recognise that pornography has become a serious addiction, we urge you to get expert help as soon as possible. And there's some advice on our website.
Pornography has all sorts of negative impact on the person using it. It can create a dependency on certain conditions in order to get aroused. So you get used to whatever the conditions are in which you're using the pornography, and can get to the place where you struggle to get aroused without those conditions. Therefore, obviously, can have a negative impact on your real relationship if it doesn't reproduce those conditions. It can also cause erectile dysfunction in your real relationship, maybe because of the guilt, maybe because of all the conflicting thoughts that are going on in your head, and that can severely affect your own sexual performance, which can be a real shock to men who usually start off using pornography because they have a very high sex drive and feel very confident sexually in their performance, and yet actually can end up creating dysfunctions that they would never have had otherwise.
For some women, pornography is an issue, but generally the danger is more likely to be fantasizing. One woman spoke about being infatuated by her teenage daughter's boyfriend who was into bodybuilding. The relationship was all in her mind, but it almost cost her her marriage. Fantasizing about other men is not an option if we're to build a good sexual relationship with our husband. However, for both men and women, fantasizing about our partner is a good and healthy part of a sex life in a marriage. To focus our mind on our husband or wife sexually and erotically will enhance our lovemaking.
So, we've looked at the importance of communication, of tenderness, of responsiveness, romance and anticipation. Finally, we want to look at the importance of variety for keeping our sexual relationship fresh and exciting. We all tend to look after things when we first get them. I remember when we bought a brand new car and we treated it with great care. Children weren't allowed to eat anything in the back. We kept it clean and shiny inside and out. Sadly, after a few months, our standards slipped and our attitude changed. Familiarity often produces complacency, and this can apply as much to relationships as it does to things.
One sexual therapist said, lovemaking is about learning and improving, not settling where you are. Complacency or dullness in our sexual relationship makes us much more susceptible to the thought of an affair. An affair seems to offer something new and different. But we believe that sex within marriage can continue with excitement and deepening passion. But for that to be possible, we must take care of it.
I think at a certain point you kind of feel like you got it all figured out. You know each other well, and there's not really too much else to get into. And so I think I got a little complacent in my relationship with her. And one of the things that really sparked our increased interest in sex and intimacy was, for me, as the man, as the guy, I needed to be reminded, again, I need to be recentered on the fact that sex, especially once you have a child and you've been married for a while, isn't necessarily going to be, you know, walk into the house, half naked woman, clothes flying everywhere, dishes all breaking everywhere, you know, which honestly is a turn off to a guy because it costs a lot of money to replace all that. But for me, it reminded me, the marriage course, that it's a decision. It really is. Our intimacy is a decision, whether it's even scheduled or whether it's just, hey, we've talked about it and we have an idea that it's going to happen. That leads to us, you know, being intimate. And I feel like that's been really powerful for me in the last, you know, since we've had the marriage course.
In terms of variety, we can vary the place that we make love, not always the bedroom. We can vary who takes the initiative. We may be able to vary the time, not always last thing at night. It's not the most dynamic moment of the day for some of us when we're exhausted.
Variety and creativity in a sexual relationship is very important. Now, having said that, I'm aware that the minute I've said that, some people will then feel under pressure, that they have to be like octopuses or amazing performers, and that's not the spirit of it. The spirit of it is to enjoy being expressive, to bring change, to not be stuck in a rut, to not be boring, quite simply. Because anything that we continually repeat loses its impact. And so if we are stuck in a rut of the same old way of making love, however wonderful it was the first few times around, may well lose its impact after a while.
We can also vary the atmosphere. The glare of a 100-watt bulb is not the most sensual light. It certainly makes me feel like a beached whale. Candlelight is much kinder.
We'll need permission from each other to experiment and make new discoveries. And we must approach it with great sensitivity and at a mutually agreeable pace. That means seeking to give pleasure to the other and not just take it for ourselves.
Variety requires creativity and romance. A night or two away in different surroundings may well be what's needed to reignite the passion.
The next exercise in your manual, Talking About Sex, is an opportunity to discuss your hopes and fears with each other. We suggest that you write something in answer to the questions that are relevant to you. You don't need to write an essay. Then start to talk about what you've each put. For some of you, that will be very difficult, but as you make a start where you feel able, it will become easier. Without entirely giving it away, your homework for this week is all practical. There was one couple who were flying to Scotland the day after session 6, and they decided they'd do their homework on the plane. It wasn't until they were on board that they turned over the page in the manual and saw what it involved.
As we've emphasised throughout this session, our sexual relationship is an important but not always easy area of marriage. When it's neglected, we're more at risk of one of us having an affair.
We were both unfaithful to each other. We had just started going to church because we knew we needed something. What we were doing and what we thought was working wasn't. The reason I feel that I was unfaithful was because I felt that with the drama of raising other children and then having my own children and being young and work and money, it was kind of like a vacation in the brain.
I just felt like I wasn't being paid attention to, not enough, very busy working, and it was long hours. And we had 3 kids, and she left the house when this happened on her situation, and it was weird.
It was a mistake, but I know that we became honest with each other.
We had to fix it. There wasn't an option.
None of us is exempt from the danger of an affair. But there are practical steps that we can take to protect and to affair-proof our marriage.
I think you always do such a good job. In the job that Craig has, he works a lot with women. And so anytime that there's a business lunch or something that's going on, he always tells me, hey, today I'm going out to lunch with so-and-so. And so there's just always that constant communication, like that accountability. So I never feel like that's, I'm never in jeopardy of stumbling on that information because he's just always been so open and honest about it.
Yeah, I've always tried to keep you informed if I'm going out with another member of the opposite sex. And if not that right then at home that night. Or
So that whole idea of that accountability would have never come into our minds had we not been working on the tools.
We want to look now at 4 particular ways that we can protect our marriage from an affair. The first way is to build each other up. The most common cause of affairs is a failure to meet each other's emotional needs for encouragement, attention, affection, and so on. An actress who co-starred with George Clooney was asked if she found him sexy. And she replied, "I tend not to look at men in that way since I got married. That antenna is no longer alive in me. I'm very loved by my husband, so I don't really feel the need to get that sort of attention from other men. He provides all that."
Secondly, set boundaries. Infidelity starts and stops in the mind. We can't help ourselves being attracted to other people, but we can decide whether or not to entertain such thoughts. Jesus' words offer the best of protection. You've heard that it was said, "Do not commit adultery," but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. As one man put it, the difference between simply looking at a woman and looking at her lustfully is usually about 5 seconds.
But many affairs begin not with immediate sexual attraction, but through intimate conversation. Physical adultery is usually preceded by emotional adultery. A woman whose marriage was threatened by an email relationship with another married man said, "My emotional soulmate relationship transferred to the emails, and I couldn't wait to open my inbox. I was spending hours every day emailing this other person, and I ceased to communicate with my husband."
If we feel attracted, setting a boundary may mean avoiding being alone together with a work colleague of the opposite sex, refusing an invitation to lunch, or if we feel emotional intimacy developing, breaking off an email correspondence.
You definitely have a boundary, and I also think that our friends keep us really accountable. Like, neither of us have close friends of the opposite sex, but we have really close friends of our same gender that we're really honest with, and I think that helps a lot.
Yeah. I think you still have to be professional too. So like if you're on a break at work and a group of people are gonna go grab coffee or something and you grab coffee with an opposite sex person, like that's fine, but tell your spouse about it. There's no reason to keep it secret. That's when things start getting weird, is when you keep too much of that secret for too long. So just be open about, hey, I had coffee with so-and-so today and it was cool. Like that's it, okay? Everybody knows, nothing's weird.
Thirdly, talk to someone about the feelings. I remember 2 friends of ours in their first year of marriage being surprised when they both found themselves attracted to other people. To start with, they didn't tell each other, and the longer they kept it secret, the stronger the infatuation became. It was only when they did admit it to each other that the bubble burst. If we can't tell our husband or wife, then it's important to tell someone else if the feelings are overpowering. Confiding in a trusted friend will often help us to see the situation we're in and the danger of throwing away what is very precious.
Fourthly, keep sex alive. Over the whole course of any marriage, at different times, husband and wife may well have different levels of desire, which can easily cause tension.
We've been through times in our marriage where our sex life hasn't been good. And I remember both of us drifting apart, and I think it is important. I think we're more easily able to fall into affairs where our sex life is not only not good, but where we feel the other person doesn't want us, where we feel rejected. So I think it's worth working at.
As we conclude this session, we want to encourage you that this vital ingredient of your relationship is worth caring for and investing in. Keeping sex alive means remembering that to love is to give to each other, at times to show restraint, at others making the effort to initiate or to be responsive, even if we don't feel like it.
Sexual desire won't stay at the same level, but as we increase the emotional intimacy between us, physical desire will usually return. We need to take a long view. This is a process of building or rebuilding our sexual relationship over the whole course of our marriage.
As a result of this session, you may want to spend the last few minutes saying sorry to your husband or wife where there's something you've done to spoil your sexual intimacy. Or you may need to express forgiveness. Then, if you're comfortable praying, say a short prayer for each other. Otherwise, express your support for your husband or wife in some other way. We're going to give you a few minutes to do that before we finish.
I'm going to end with a short prayer. Lord, we thank you for the way you've made us, with all the complexity and subtlety of our sexual responses. Thank you that we're able to express love to each other through being joined together sexually. Help us as we learn to arouse each other and then to satisfy those desires. Help us to give ourselves to each other in love throughout our marriage. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Before you go, we suggest that you spend a few minutes with your diaries organising some marriage time for this coming week.
But that's all from us. We hope that this has been a helpful session and has enabled you to talk together about this topic. Goodbye.
Enjoy the homework. Goodbye.